Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. May all the peace and blessings of the Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be on all of us. Now today, as you can see, I want us to look at the two other physiological processes, that is the diffusion and active transport. Now we're going to look at their roles and factors affecting them and their definitions as well, and we call it a lesson. Now let's start with the first one, diffusion. Now class, what is diffusion and what type of substances does diffusion involve? And as we saw yesterday's class, that osmosis was basically involving the movement of water molecules from where they are highly concentrated to where they were lowly concentrated. Now class, today as you can see that diffusion is the process by which molecules move from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration, and basically these molecules can be molecules of a gas or molecules of liquid, and basically diffusion does not take place in solids. And therefore diffusion, we see that is the process by which molecules move from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. And as such class, we say that diffusion takes place along the concentration gradients. Very good. Now let's give an example of a scenario where diffusion is experienced. Now the scent of a flower, maybe a flower is somewhere there and sometimes you smell the scent of the flower, and therefore the scent of the flower is spread through the process of diffusion. As well as perfume. If a perfume is sprayed at the one end of a room, at the corner of a room, after some time you're going to sense that the smell of the perfume has spread all over the room, and that process is called diffusion of a gas. As well, class, we can see that potassium permanganate. Potassium permanganate is purple in color, and when a small piece of potassium permanganate is dropped in water, after some time, the color of the water changes to pale blue, or at times purple, or rather pale purple, showing that particles of potassium permanganate spreads into the water molecules, and therefore that is why the water changes to purple. Now let's look at some of the factors that affect the rate of diffusion. Factor number one that affects the rate of diffusion, class, is the diffusion gradient. How does the diffusion gradient affect the rate of diffusion? And diffusion gradient basically means the difference in concentration between the two mediums over which diffusion is taking place. Now we say the higher the diffusion gradient between 2 points, the faster the rate of diffusion as well. The lower the diffusion gradient between 2 points, the lower the rate of diffusion. And as such class, when the diffusion gradient is, when the concentration difference between the two mediums is high, the rate of diffusion is very fast, while when the diffusion difference, or rather the concentration difference between the two mediums is low, the rate of diffusion will be slow as well. Now let's look at the thickness of tissues. The thick membranes or the thick cells and tissues, the rate of diffusion is slow, simply because the diffusing molecules have a longer distance to travel to cover the distance of diffusion. As opposed to when the membrane is thin, we say the rate of diffusion is faster, since the distance to be covered by the diffusing molecules will be shorter, and hence first the rate of diffusion becomes faster. And as such, we say the thicker membranes take the rate of the diffusion in thick membranes is slow, while in thin membranes it is fast. Now let's look at size of the molecules. Now when it comes to the size of molecules, we compare light molecules with heavy molecules. Small and light molecules diffuse faster, while large and heavy molecules diffuse at a slower rate. And therefore, class, we say small and light molecules diffuse faster than large and heavy molecules. Now let's look at the type of medium. The type of medium, class, basically that diffusion takes place, we said, is liquid and gases, and therefore we say that diffusion is faster in gases as compared to liquids. Now let's look at the temperature. How does temperature affect the rate of diffusion? Class, diffusion involves movement of particles from where they are highly concentrated to where they are lowly concentrated. Therefore, increasing the temperature, class, increases the kinetic energy of the diffusing particles or the diffusing molecules. And once the kinetic energy of the diffusing molecules is increased in class, it means the particles, or rather the molecules, will be moving at a faster rate, and hence increasing the rate of diffusion. And vice versa is true for the same. Where we say, when the temperature is low, the kinetic energy also is reduced, and therefore the particles will be moving slowly, and hence the rate of diffusion will be slow as well. Now let's look at the surface area to volume ratio. The higher the surface area to volume ratio, the faster the rate of diffusion, while the lower the surface area to volume ratio, the slower the rate of diffusion. Now let's look at the roles of diffusion. Now, roles of diffusion, we have role number 1 as absorption of materials. Now, absorption of materials takes place in, we discussed in 2 ways. We have mineral ions as well digested food. And we know diffusion basically involves movement of molecules from where they are highly concentrated to where they are lowly concentrated. And these particles are basically gases and liquids as well. Now, class mineral ions, the root absorb mineral ions from the soil through the process of diffusion when the concentration of the mineral salt is higher in the soil as compared to the root, and therefore we are going to see that also absorption of mineral ions from the soil as a role of active transport. And therefore, when we are discussing in active transport, we say the concentration of the mineral ions is lower in the soil as compared into the root cell, and therefore the process of diffusion of active transport is against the concentration gradient, and therefore is going to absorb. Very good. Now let's look at the digested food substances. And we know that the process of digestion ends at the ileum, or rather the small intestine. Now the digested food substances, molecules which are in form of glucose if it was carbohydrates, amino acid for proteins, they will be absorbed from the ileum through the walls of the ileum into the bloodstream through the process of diffusion, and therefore you know where the concentration of the digested food is high and where it is low, because you can also see that absorption of digested food from the alimentary canal has also a role in active transport. Now, depending on where the concentration is higher, now we can tell which one will be absorbed from where. Gaseous exchange in plants and animals, and we know that gaseous exchange takes place across the respiratory surface in plant, and also stomata across the respiratory surface in across the stomata in plant, and also in animals, the lungs, alveoli, the tracheal system, buccal cavity, all those regions. And therefore, class gaseous exchange, that process where some gases diffuse out of the across the respiratory system to the atmosphere, while others come from the atmosphere across the respiratory system into the cells and tissues, class that is called, that is now the process of diffusion. Removal of nitrogenous waste in unicellular organisms. And what we know, class, is that unicellular organism is a very simple organism that does not have, is an unicellular organism made up of a single cell. And as such, therefore, class, they have large surface area to volume ratio. And having large surface area to volume ratio basically means that their body surface is in direct contact with the surrounding environment. And therefore, simple mechanisms such as diffusion will suffice exchange of materials from their body surface into the atmosphere through the process of diffusion. And therefore, class, they remove the waste product by simple mechanism process, and such as diffusion. Now, let's go to the active transport. Now, class, active transport is the process by which substances move across the cell membrane against a concentration gradient. Against a concentration gradient basically means they move from where they are lowly concentrated to where they are highly concentrated. And along a concentration gradient basically means they move from where they are highly concentrated to where they are lowly concentrated. What do they use? By use of energy and carriers. Very good. Now let's look at the factors affecting diffusion. Class, you say, any factor that affects the rate of respiration also affects the rate of active transport, because active transport requires energy, and the process of diffusion produces energy. Now, class, the process of respiration can be summarized by the oxidation of glucose to release energy. That is glucose C6 H12 of O6 plus oxygen gas to form carbon dioxide plus water plus energy. Now, class, you can see that this is glucose. This here we have glucose. We have glucose. Here we have oxygen. Now here, class, we have the energy being produced. Now let's this one 6 6. Now class, you can see that you have glucose concentration, you have oxygen concentration, and this process is an enzyme controlled process, respiratory enzyme. Now class, factors affecting the rate of respiration can be basically extracted from the chemical reaction that summarizes the process of respiration. Now the process of respiration is basically summarized by this chemical equation, and that is glucose being oxidized by oxygen to form carbon dioxide and water. Now let's look at this. Now this glucose class is a factor affecting the rate of active transport as well, respiration. We can see that oxygen is also a factor affecting the rate of respiration as well, active transport. Now we know class that respiration process is an enzyme controlled reaction, and therefore we know that enzymes work best at certain pH range as well as certain temperature, and therefore temperature and pH are also factors affecting rate of respiration as well active transport, because they are related, the two. Very good. Now class, we can see other factors such as hormones and physical activities of the person can also affect the rate of active transport. Now let's look at how do they affect. The higher the oxygen concentration, the faster the rate of diffusion. An increase in substrate concentration increases the rate of diffusion. An increase in substrate concentration increases the rate of active transport, while a decrease in the rate of substrate concentration decreases the rate of active transport as well. Now class, let's go to temperature. How does temperature affect the rate of active transport? You know class, temperature affects the way of working of the enzymes. Temperature, an increase in temperature towards the optimum increases the rate of active transport. Why? This is because enzymes get inactivated. Enzymes get activated. At optimum temperatures, enzymes work best. Temperatures below the optimum, enzymes are inactive, while temperature beyond the optimum, enzymes are denatured. And therefore, we can see that temperature controls the rate of how enzymes work. Hormones. Some hormones such as adrenaline increases the rate of active transport. Very good. Activity. Now the activity a person engaged in, people doing vigorous exercises, require high amount of energy as compared to the people who are resting. And therefore as such, the higher the activity, the vigorous physical activity, the higher the rate of active transport, and the vice versa as well. Now let's note the roles. Reabsorption of sugars and subsalts in the kidney tubules. And this process class we know is called where some sugars, they are basically reabsorbed when at the proximal convoluted tubule, and when this happens is when the sugars are lowly concentrated in the kidney tubules and they are being absorbed into the bloodstream, and that process class is what we are referred to as that takes place through the process of active transport. And when the sugars are highly concentrated in the kidney tubules as compared to the bloodstream, therefore they will be absorbed through the process of diffusion. And therefore class, both absorption of digested food from the ileum to the bloodstream can enter both the process of as a role of diffusion as well as a role of active transport. Absorption of mineral ions from the soil can enter both as a role of diffusion as well as the role of active transport. In either way, now it depends where is this mineral ions and digested food in highly concentrated, and where are they being taken to, so that you can tell us which process are they being transported from where they are to where they are, or absorbed, or they move. Now class, absorption of mineral ion salts from the soil by root. This is when the concentration of salt is slower in the soil. Absorption of digested food from the alimentary canal, excretion of waste products from the body cells. And therefore class, that is briefly about active transport and diffusion. Wish you well. Dive deep into our fascinating biology and mathematical lessons. We'll demystify the concepts that give you nightmares. Wish you all the best. Have a prosperous day ahead.